After a hiatus due to the outbreak of COVID-19, the G7 foreign ministers recently gathered in London, England for their first face-to-face meeting to discuss how to deal with an increasingly assertive Chinese authority and safeguarding common values in the increasingly intense geopolitical landscape. On May 4th, the foreign ministers of the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan gathered in London for a two-day face-to-face meeting. Unlike previous meetings, the meeting focused on standing against the expansion of the Chinese hegemony and the diplomatic challenges from Iran and Russia. The meeting also included addressing the post-pandemic recovery and the climate change issues. On May 5th, at the end of a two-day meeting, the G7 issued a communique. Among the 6 paragraphs under the topic China, G7 condemns the human rights violations and abuses in Xinjiang and Tibet and China's decision fundamentally to erode democratic elements of the electoral system in Hong Kong. The communique wrote, "In line with its obligations under international and national law, we call on China to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. We continue to be deeply concerned about human rights violations and abuses in Xinjiang and in Tibet, especially the targeting of Uyghurs, members of other ethnic and religious minority groups, and the existence of a large-scale network of political re-education camps, and reports of forced labor systems and forced sterilization. We recall our statement on March 12th and remain gravely concerned by China's decision fundamentally to erode democratic elements of the electoral system in Hong Kong. We call on China to act in accordance with its international commitments and its legal obligations, including those enshrined in the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the Basic Law, and to respect Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy and rights and freedoms. We call on China and the Hong Kong authorities to end the targeting of those who defend rights and freedoms and democratic values, to uphold the independence of the judicial system and to ensure cases are not transferred to the mainland. And we encourage China to uphold its commitments and act responsibly in cyberspace, including refraining from conducting or supporting cyber-enabled intellectual property theft." Moreover, the G7 supports Taiwan's meaningful participation in World Health Organization forums and the World Health Assembly. The G7 also remains seriously concerned about the situation in and around the East and South China Seas and said, "We underscore the importance of peace and assembly across the Taiwan Strait and encourage the peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues. We reiterate our strong opposition to any unilateral actions that could escalate tensions and undermine regional stability and the international rules-based order, and express serious concerns about reports of militarization, coercion, and intimidation in the region." Unlike in the past, the British presidency of the G7 this year has invited the foreign ministers of Australia, India, South Korea, and South Africa to participate in part of the meeting, including a formal dinner on May 4th, aimed at highlighting the G7's support for democracies and the British government's attempts to build stronger ties with Asia after Brexit. The ministerial meeting is to prepare for next month's G7 summit. Prior to his visit to the United Kingdom, U.S. Secretary of State John Blinken criticized the Chinese Communist Party on May 2nd on CBS's 60 Minutes for suppressing human rights at home and demonstrating military aggression. Blinken said, "Over the past several years, China is acting more repressively at home and more aggressively abroad." When asked by the host, Norah O'Donnell, "Do you think we're heading towards some sort of military confrontation with China?" Blinken said, "I think it's profoundly against the interest of both China and the United States to get to that point or even head in that direction." Blinken's response reflects the fact that Europe, the United States, and other democratic countries are still seeking a non-military approach to balance with China, but there is no denying that they are also taking an increasingly hard line against Beijing. At the G7 meeting, British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said, "The United Kingdom was getting the G7 to come together with a rapid rebuttal mechanism to counter misinformation, so that when we see these lies and propaganda or fake news being put out there, we can, not just individually, but come together to provide a rebuttal and frankly to provide the truth for the people of this country, but also in Russia or China or around the world," Raab said. Russia and China are trying to sow mistrust across the West, whether by spreading disinformation in elections or by spreading lies about COVID-19 vaccines, according to the British, US, and European secretary officials. Japan, which is the closest country to China and has a historically tense relationship with China, has refrained from joining the European and American sanctions against the Beijing authorities for concerns of inflaming its trade relationship with China. But Japan's attitude has also changed recently. The G7 statement expressed serious concerns about the situation around the East and South China Seas. According to Wen Ti-sung, a lecturer at the Australian National University's School of Asia-Pacific Studies, the statement is an exact replica of the joint statement issued after April 16th meeting between Biden and Japanese Minister Yoshihide Suga. The statement is seen as the US and its allies in the Indo-Pacific region beginning to re-examine their relationship with China. This represents a growing trend in Europe to follow the footsteps of the US and Japan, and it's in line with the trend in recent months of European countries gradually participating in joint military exercises and intelligence sharing efforts in the quadrilateral security talks led by the US, Japan, and Australia, as Europe's footprint in the Indo-Pacific strategy deepens, said Son. Italy, as one of the G7, has been regarded as one of the most China-friendly countries in Europe and had signed the Belt and Road Initiative with Beijing authorities in 2019. But in March, Italy and the European Union both summoned the Chinese ambassador and expressed grave concern about the situation of the Uyghurs. Many commentators have pointed out that China's spectacular economic and military development over the past 40 years, coupled with its political regression, is considered one of the most important geopolitical events in recent times, alongside the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the fact that the G7 meeting focused on China and shows how much attention it has received. During the G7 meeting, Chinese state-run media accused the United States of promoting the China threat theory and trying to drive a wedge between China and the world. According to a report by VOA, John Curtin, an analyst with the G7 research group at the University of Toronto, said that the US has been sowing discord between China and the world, and that the G7 is simply upholding the principles enshrined at its foundation in 1975. Curtin said G7's aim was to protect within its own members and promote globally the values of an open democracy and individual liberty. They were very much threatened by an expanding Russia above all in 1975. And they're still threatened by Russia today, but also China and other authoritarian regimes. Britain, which is hosting the meeting as it hosts the rotating presidency of the G7, also invited foreign ministers from Australia, India, South Africa, and South Korea to the talks, a demonstration of London's focus on the Indo-Pacific region. What we're seeing is the birth of a broader democratic family, and if they are willing to put their country's names on paper alongside the Democratic Seven, the G7 itself, that will be an even more powerful signal, he noted. The European Union, which has always been moderate towards Beijing, has recently acted accordingly in the face of a regime that is increasing its authoritarian power and provocations against international human rights. Reuters reported on the 5th of May titled, EU puts up guard to Chinese firms, cools on trade deal, said the European Commission has recently unveiled its plans to cut dependency on Chinese and other foreign suppliers. The Commission is also pausing efforts to promote the China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, recognizing it will struggle to secure backing from EU lawmakers while Beijing maintains sanctions on 5 of their colleagues. For now, the Commission is giving the agreement a legal review and translating it to EU languages, but the European Parliament is only likely to evaluate in 2022. Bloomberg on May 4th quoted China's European Union Chamber of Commerce President Jörg Watt as saying that the atmosphere in the European-Chinese relations has changed. Watt said that China's assertiveness towards Taiwan, its move to impose political control over Hong Kong, and international sanctions over alleged human rights abuses in the Xinjiang region overlaid by the fact that China hasn't followed. Bloomberg also quoted an unnamed EU official as saying that Chancellor Angela Merkel spoke with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang last week, and the two pledged closer cooperation. Yet, the talk in Berlin shows that optimism around the relationship is gone, and one Chinese official characterized ties with Europe as on a downward trajectory. Whether the Greens come to power in Germany or not, EU-China relationships are at a critical juncture. In fact, this year, the EU executive and Germany have not only developed their own bills to restrict investment in Chinese entities, but have also joined the US in reciprocal sanctions targeting Beijing. And the Italian government, which has always been a supporter of Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative, has now begun to block Chinese takeovers. The Netherlands, one of China's top 10 trading partners, has become more cautious in protecting its own high-tech companies from takeovers and developing a dedicated China policy. The European Commission announced on May 5th a new law to prevent government-subsidized foreign companies from merging and acquiring in the EU and competing unfairly, hoping to provide the right conditions for European industries to flourish. The law has been viewed as an attempt to prevent Chinese aggregation. Internal Market Commissioner Thierry Breton said to Reuters that with the proposal, the EU is closing a gap in our rulebook to make sure that all companies compete on an equal footing. EU Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis, who also called on the industry to push through a diversification of suppliers, said in a proposal that EU officials drew up a list of 137 products of high dependency in sectors such as raw materials, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and products essential to move the bloc closer to its climate change goals. About half of imports of these dependent products originate from China. The report points out that in recent years, more and more EU countries are concerned that the Chinese enterprises are acting under the guidance of the Chinese Communist Party and using heavy government subsidies to acquire cutting-edge technology in Europe and combat European competitors. An example of this was the Chinese home appliance manufacturer Media Group's M&A of the German robotics factory KUKA. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who played a catalytic role in the European-Chinese trade agreement negotiations, highlighted the issue of human rights in an April 27th online meeting with Li Keqiang, adding that the two sides disagree on the issue, especially with regards to Hong Kong. Analysts said although Merkel did not relax on the issue of economic and trade cooperation between the two sides, she has also been aware of the growing anti-China emotion in Germany, which could affect the next general election outcome. According to a May 3rd report in the German Handelsblatt, the German Foreign Ministry warned in an internal document that Beijing is promoting a China-centric, parallel structure to current international organizations through the Belt and Road, with the goal of expanding political influence, setting its own standards, and subsidizing state-owned enterprises. In contrast, the EU's EU-China Connectivity Initiative to counteract this is too reactive and lacks a clear strategy. The report says that more countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that are mired in the Belt and Road are looking for support from the EU to unwind without getting involved in the US-China conflict, and that the EU should seize the opportunity to be proactive and invest in energy, communications, and transportation infrastructure in partner countries, while defending human rights, labor protections, and the rule of law standards there instead of waiting. On April 27th, French Foreign Minister Le Drian participated in a forum organized by Le Grand Continent magazine on the topic, "Is a geopolitical awakening possible in Europe?" In the forum, he said, Europe has made some key geopolitical shifts. These include, for example, the Commission describing China as a partner, a competitor, and a systematic rival for the EU. The decision to create a genuine European strategy for the Indo-Pacific. Foreign investment screening set up by the European Union last October in strategic sectors such as telecommunications, biotechnologies, and infrastructure. The press release published by the Commission on the 18th of February setting a course for a new EU trade policy strategy with clear requirements in terms of reciprocity and fairness of trade. In addition, after Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison's administration scrapped China's Belt and Road Agreement with Victoria last month, it is now rumored that Australia's new Defence Minister Peter Dutton has ordered a review of China's Landbridge Group's 99-year lease of the country's Darwin port, and that it may be revoked. The move is expected to deal another blow to the already deteriorating relationship between Australia and China. Darwin Port is arguably the most important port on Australia's north coast and the closest to Asia, being the gateway to the Indo-Pacific region and the rotating base for the U.S. Marine Corps into Australia. In 2015, the Northern Territory government leased the port to China's Landbridge Group for 99 years at a cost of 506 million Australian dollars, drawing much criticism.